for me, this idea of just spit to get the note to come out, and it just pops like that.
Yeah.
It's all of a sudden, oh, if all I need to do to make a note come out is, then everything else is easier.
This episode contains adult language and adult humor. Since when have trumpet players ever been considered adults? If you are easily offended by these types of conversations, consider switching to the oboe. Welcome to the Trumpet Gurus Hang podcast. I'm your host, Jose Johnson. My guest for this episode is Rich Colquhoun. Rich is a man on a mission. A classically trained graduate of the Royal Welsh College of Music and Drama, Rich found that he was not completely prepared for the demands of the modern freelance trumpet player. His search for the solution to his playing problems led him to Jerry Callet and the Tounge Controlled Embouchure method. Since then, Rich has authored several books and developed a number of online resources to help trumpet players around the globe take their playing to new heights. So, pour yourself a big glass, pull up a chair, and let the hang begin. All right, welcome to this episode of the Trumpet Gurus Hang, and I am joined all the way from the UK by Mr. Rich Colquhoun. Did I get that right? Colquhoun?
You did, yes.
Oh, hey, woo! So, Rich, thank you so much for taking time to be with us for this episode, and I'm really excited to talk with you about your experiences, and particularly your experiences with Jerry Callet and his teaching and methodology. That's always been really fascinating to me. So, I got turned on to Jerry in the early 80s when he was doing his trumpet yoga stuff.
Yeah, interesting.
And so he came to, I was going to school at the Ohio State University, and he was there. He did a master class, and then not much, I didn't pay much attention to anything until the mid 80s when I needed to buy a new horn, and I tried out one of his New York models. And fell in love with it, bought it, played it, for a long time, and then actually ended up taking a few lessons with Jerry, and then meeting him over the years over at different events and things like that. And then anytime I would see him, he always would come up to me and ask me how I've been and talk with me, and just such a great guy. So I'm really interested in hearing your take on some of his methodology and how you've been implementing that and teaching that and kind of keeping that tradition going. So let's get going with that, man. How did you first get introduced to these concepts?
Okay, well, so I'm quite an avid internet user, and I suppose my story goes a bit like this. I graduated from the Royal Welsh College of Music and Drama with a degree in classical trumpet playing in 2005, and almost immediately fell into commercial trumpet playing. I've always done quite a variety of different things. I've always done musical theatre. I've played in big bands when I was growing up as well. But I was going out and doing these function gigs, and I was in a ska band at the time. And I was just coming home with beaten up chops every I would say every night, but let's say 3 or 4 nights a week, rehearsals and gigs, and things weren't working out. And so I was just on the internet looking for anything I could find, basically, that could sort of steer me in the right direction. And there were a couple forums around. There was one that was actually UK based. I think it was just called Brass Musician or something like that, and some people we know were on there. I believe that Michael Barclay was actually involved in that forum back in the day. That's when I first heard his name, and it may have been Brian Davis or one of these top players anyway. And they were all talking about downsizing mouthpieces, and for me, I had already been to a shop and bought the smallest mouthpiece I could play on, which was a 3C, which that's real comedy to me these days. I haven't played on anything that big in over a decade, But so I was just on this bit of a search, and like I said, I'm a real avid internet user, and digging through Trumpet Herald Forum and the Trumpet Master, and I came across this talk of super chops, and that's what got me onto Jerome Callet's website. And I'm looking through this information, and I'm seeing things that contradict everything I've ever been taught. He's talking about starting every note with a tongue stop, which if you sort of we sort of think of the tongue stop as having that kind of sound to it, and so you think, well, you can't start a note with with that slapping noise, but of course that's obviously I just didn't really know what it all meant, but I was just so curious that I started digging around deeper, and it turns out that something that Jerry was really well known for was doing lessons over the telephone.
Mm-hmm.
And so I phoned him up, and it went from there. He sold me one of his mouthpieces, which is quite a normal thing for him, and it was a phone lesson later. I was sort of well on the way. And I think that I'm always asked how long it took me to change. I think I changed my playing entirely in 6 months.
Okay.
I actually had a 6-week period from October 2012, when I had no gigs until Handel's Messiah. The Trumpet Shall Sound was my next gig, sort of in the middle of December, and I said to myself, right, I'm gonna double down on this for 3 weeks, and if I can't play in 3 weeks' time, I've got 3 weeks to get it back.
There you go.
And I didn't turn back. That was that. It was all. I use the term TCE, a tongue controlled embouchure, kind of out of respect for Bob Civiletti, or I should say Barb Civiletti, as he likes to be called, who really, after the phone lessons I had with Jerry, I had the opportunity to meet with Barb a few times, and he's the one who really helped me to apply the system to music, which I think is one of the things that many people really struggle with.
Yeah. Well, it's what's interesting to me then is that the super chops method, right? As I was saying earlier, I remember when Jerry first came out with the trumpet yoga, and then it became the super chops, and then more referred to as the TCE, the tongue controlled embouchure concepts. On the surface, it seemed to primarily cater to the needs of a lead trumpet player. But I have run into a lot of, commercial players. I kind of put in a different category than lead players, but lead being kind of that specialized portion of commercial. Yeah. But, also finding that a lot of people in the classical realm were adopting this method into their arsenal, not necessarily to be able to play screaming double high Cs, which, everybody wants to do that, but just to have more control and access to the upper register in a little more effortless way, particularly for playing I've talked to guys that have used this as a way of being able to handle those higher repertoire parts, and even playing pick and things like that, of being able to get that kind of compression that's needed without fighting the horn. So have you noticed in your teachings that there are people from more than just that lead commercial background that are looking for this method, and how does it apply to these situations?
Yeah. Okay, good. We got 2 good questions there. First of all, I always like to tell a bit of a story about these methods, because Jerry constantly evolved his approach to teaching, and sort of the focus of the method over time. when you look at the trumpet yoga era that you mentioned, I think that stuff's really important, and it's fascinating because generally speaking, he's focused on the concept of unfurling the lips, which is something that you hear a lot about when you talk to people from Maynard Ferguson's band. You know, this Roger Ingram has said in the past that Maynard played with somewhat of an einsetzen Embouchure. The term einsetzen means, or at least in this context, it means setting the mouthpiece in the lips as opposed to on the lips. And so that can mean kind of like that, if you can, those who are on the video version. I think it's, oh gosh, my brain's gone. Oh, Lynn Nicholson, I was going to say, he's got his Maynard Ferguson protocol,
Right.
which I was actually really into for a while, because for this very reason that actually this unfurling of the lips in the upper register is what allows you to carry on getting the air through. You know, when we think about just simply pushing the lips together, it's very easy to do it to the point that air can't actually get through the lips, and when there's no air going through the lips, there's no sound. So in those days, the method was very much about developing this strong upper register, and it was very focused on, you know, there were interesting comments in Jerry's Brass Power and Endurance book that say things like you should play as loudly as you can for 80% of your practice. And so it was, here are the words: tone, power, range, and endurance. That was the mantra of the old Jerry Callet ways. And the story goes that he got to even the point where he brought out the Super Chops book, which is 1987. He was 57 years old at that point. And he's on the VHS tape that accompanies that book, screaming double high C's over people playing Herbert Clark exercises. But you know, he actually said at the time that obviously he was not getting any younger, and he knew that the physical power required to play in the way that he was in those days wasn't going to be around for long, as far as he was concerned. And so I would say that it's around that time that we start seeing a change in the focus of the teaching from being very much to do with a lip movement or a lip position to being about using the tongue to do the job of that the lip was previously doing. Maybe that needs a little bit more explanation.
Yeah, that actually, that's an interesting concept, and I would love to hear you elucidate on that a little more.
So the way that I would describe it is that we are going to use a model to describe trumpet playing as being the controlled release of pressurized air. Now that's something that can really go against a lot of people like to talk about airflow, talk about moving air from one place to another. But if you'll bear with me, we'll not unpick that one too much at this stage, because I can go off on in a different direction, which may not be helpful. But if we were to say that you know, a greater air pressure inside the body is what's going to give us higher vibrations as the air goes through the aperture, then we have to sort of question where that pressure is coming from. Now, obviously, we can talk about use of the abdominal muscles to force the air out. We're pushing up from beneath, and the air goes out through the chops. But if those chops are wide open and relaxed, then all my air's gone in a second. Mm-hmm. So therefore, we have to be talking about resistance, controlling that release of the air. And some, you know, a lot of people will say, oh, it's all to do with the throat with the mouthpiece. But actually in the Super Chop system, or in Jerome Callet's teaching, what he would say is that it's the job of the embouchure, whatever the embouchure may be, it's the job of the embouchure to prevent air from getting into the cup of the mouthpiece. So there's one of our massive contradictions that I mentioned reading on his website. You know, it's like I'd been taught a lot about getting air through the lips. And actually, here's a guy saying that what we actually want to do is stop the air from going through the lips. But this is the idea that's actually being expressed there, and that is that if you imagine that there is a door on a hinge that can go in both directions, if you push from one side, the door just moves away. But if there's somebody on the other side pushing back, then you can apply force.
Okay.
So that person on the other side pushing back is your chops in this context. So you're using you're maintaining a small aperture so that you've got something to push against, and that's where we're going to get our air compression from. Now, what I mentioned before is that in TCE, when we tend to think of using the tongue to do that job rather than the lips. So I should explain that in the previous Super Chop system that Jerry was teaching in the late 80s, it was very much to do with the bottom lip pushing upwards so that it goes up and over the top teeth. So not so much lip on lip compression, but it's just that movement of the bottom lip up here so that the air has to squeeze around the tight space.
Mm-hmm.
And what we do, what makes TCE different is that actually that aperture or that gap that the air needs to squeeze through is between this flat top surface of the tongue and the cutting edge of the top teeth. And so the idea is that the tongue is a much stronger muscle than the lips. Of course, the lips aren't actually made of muscle at all. It's the surrounding the muscles that.
Right. So by shifting the workload to a stronger, more substantive portion of the body, then you're able to get a greater result with less effort. There's always going to be effort involved in everything.
Yeah, there is, and it's and I think that really what happens once we start talking about, we're literally putting the tongue in the way, and people will always ask, well, how is the air going to get through? And that brings up the question of exactly how much air we actually want to be using to play the trumpet, which is it's definitely a point of contention.
Yeah, well, I think it's in terms of pedagogy. There are so many different methods, and there's so many different ways of explaining concepts. So what I have a story that I use a lot in other stuff, in like my mindfulness consulting and things like that, and talking about, it's an old. It was attributed to Rumi, but it predates Rumi. It's an old kind of a Hindu story about the blind men and the elephant. And, it's that you have these 6 blind men, they've never seen an elephant. And, each of them is describing an elephant based on what they're touching. And, one person says it feels like touching the tusk, it feels like a spear. Another touching the tail, feels like a rope, so on, so on, so on. The moral of the story being that none of them were right, but none of them were wrong. That it's all based on a matter of perspective. What you're experiencing is you're going to determine how you can describe anything. And I think with so many of these pedagogical approaches that, one, there's validity. If somebody can do it, one person can do it, it's a fluke. If you can teach other people to do it, then that is a valid method. Now, it may not be valid for everybody, but it's valid and it is useful. And then the perspective and the perceptions of the individual dictate how they will explain it. So one person may say that it's like whistling. Another person will say, it's using your tongue to interrupt the airstream. It's creating a longer aperture tunnel. So all these different things that people use to say, to explain it, they're just all portions of this greater whole and this greater concept. And I think that with TCE, and this is true, I guess, of almost every approach, is you will have your avid like your diehard people that say this is it. You'll have people that just will bash it because it's contradictory to what they've been taught or what they believe to be true. And then there's the rest of us that are kind of in the middle going, okay, well, this bears some investigation, and there's some good stuff here. And so when you deal with that from a teacher's perspective, as somebody who's trying to promote a system, how do you deal with the resistance that people give that are kind of really tied into their particular tradition of learning and approach to playing?
I think that, well, I mean, first of all, I don't think that I would end up in a room teaching somebody the TCE unless they asked for it specifically. So that's not an attempt to dodge the question, but I can just definitely give you some experiences that I've had with other players, and all I've really been able to do is just sort of ask them to think about, sort of examine the evidence and say, look, you don't think I'm a bad player. You wouldn't have booked me for this gig if you thought that that there was something wrong with what I do. We play in tune together, we sound good together, and so yeah, it's all about really sort of hearing the evidence and having to battle it out that way. Yeah, I think really that's it. I can always explain to people how the system has helped me. And in fact, I've just realized there was a question you asked me before that I didn't answer. I can come back to that. Yeah, it's complicated. I mean, sometimes you have to give up.
Yeah.
I did. So, I mean, without being specific in any way, I did have a colleague that used to do quite a lot of chamber orchestra gigs with, and he had started taking online lessons from somebody who was a part of a very specific school, and a very dogmatic one at that. And he used to do things like he would look at my mouthpiece and he'd go, "Oh, that sort of thing would have conned me a few years ago." I'm like, "Oh, okay, thanks. Well, I've actually been doing this for longer than you've been doing your thing." So, yeah, it's tough. It's really hard.
Yeah.
I have actually, for my own sanity, had to have pretty much cut myself off from many internet forums and the like, because people will really dig deep to find something to criticize. Especially those who have tried a technique and not had positive results. Those are the ones who seem to be the most adamant that it's, let's say, right or wrong. It's a wrong thing to do. Yeah. So,
well, yeah, and that's such a part of human nature. I think that the things that we don't understand or we don't directly relate to, it's hard for us to accept them. And I mean, we're seeing this societally. I mean, it's become very, very evident in our world that it's much easier to hate someone because they have a different political slant, religious slant. They look different than you, as opposed to trying to understand them and understand their unique perspective. And Trumpet is just a microcosm of life. So I think that you don't have to agree with everything, and it's, again, understanding that not everything is going to work for you. Like when I was younger, I could not play a Bach horn to save my life. I couldn't play a Bach mouthpiece. I couldn't play a Bach trumpet. And even to this day, I really don't like them. I don't like the feel. It just feels very uncomfortable to me. It doesn't mean that Bachs are horrible. It doesn't mean they suck. I mean, there are a lot of great players, people that are way better than me that play Bach equipment. It doesn't work for me personally. And so as the old saying goes, to toss the baby out with the bathwater, I think is one of the worst things that we could ever do. I think that one of the things that has moved us forward as a civilization is our ability to reason and to in our inquiry. And I think that having a open mind to new concepts, different concepts, ultimately serves for our betterment individually. And if we're thinking as trumpet players, if every trumpet player could increase their abilities, whether it be range, endurance, technique, power, any of those things. If every person could increase by 10%, what would the music sound like in another year, or 2 years, or 3 years? And then what's the next generation going to sound like? And what's the next gen? So we're helping to build music and make trumpet playing so much more dynamic. But we can't do that if we don't experiment with new things and try new approaches.
I think that's something that's really difficult about music colleges is, I mean, certainly there are still some music colleges out there who will only employ teachers that play in the local symphony orchestra. And, they may have been taught 20 years ago by somebody who learned 30 years before that. And we're already talking about the 1960s. Or I went to college in 2001, so 24 years before that, 1980, and then the person who taught my teacher 30 years before that, or 20, it's like 1950, and it's like these books that I have in front of me here weren't even written. That's and so it's we do need to find a way of getting these ideas out there. And the funny thing is, I mean, something that I often end up going off on a rant about quite a lot is that actually the ideas in Jerry Callet's books are not new for the most part. He always tended to say that he had rediscovered these methods. For example, if you look on, I've got a website, tonguecontrolled.info, and on there's a page that lists books that talk about tonguing on the lips. This is an idea that if you want to get into TCE or Super Chops or any of the Jerry Callet stuff, it's been present since day one. The tongue, even if in the early days it was a striking action, in later times it's an anchored position. But in any case, the tongue must be allowed to touch the lips when you play. And there's all of these old books talk about things like spitting seeds, or imagine you have a hair on your tongue, and it's all these analogies that make you go. It's putting the tongue right forward, touching the lips, and all this sort of thing. So you asked me before about how I've tried to get some of these ideas into my teaching, and specifically not necessarily with commercial style playing, but people who are going through a more traditional or classical approach. And my argument for tongue on the lips, other than I can describe the many ways that I think it's beneficial overall for anyone, TCE or not, but for anybody who wants to experiment, the number one thing for me is the immediacy of the attack. I actually suffered from, I think I heard someone on this same podcast saying embouchure fatigue syndrome a few weeks back. I when I was at college, I was just playing so much all the time, and in a more traditional way, and I got on pretty well using the no method pressure. There was a lot of lip stretching, there was a lot of lip swelling and big mouthpieces, and my tuning slide was about an inch further out than you'd want it to be, because I played so sharp all the time as a result of all these issues, And one of the things that I found is that over time my note production was getting worse. I would go to play, and you can imagine the opening to Mahler's Fifth Symphony, da-da-ga-dum, da-da-ga-dum, and it was like, And there's just nothing there. And we went down, my teacher and I, we went, he was very well versed in a lot of different methods, and we went down the air attacks route and he was quite into James Stamp and this sort of thing. And I don't think that any of it was really solving the problem. And that's not, like you said, it's not to say that it doesn't work brilliantly for a lot of people. But for me, this idea of just spit to get the note to come out and it just pops like that.
Yeah.
It's all of a sudden, oh, if all I need to do to make a note come out is, then everything else is easier. Because I think that a lot of effort is wasted in that initial impulse, if you like. In fact, I think it was Mary Franquin, the successor to Arbon at the Paris Conservatoire, who devoted quite a significant portion of his book to, I don't know what the word he would have used was, obviously in French. I think it was emissions. It looks like emissions very literally, but it's obviously not an English word. And it would be exercises where you have a crotchet, a quarter note on the first beat of a 4/4 bar, and you're supposed to play that note, put the trumpet down, pick it up, play the next note, put it down, pick it up, and it's just that repeated, just repeatedly the same every time, just getting that attack, that clarity of tone to leap from the instrument immediately when you want it to. And so that fixed a lot of issues that I was having with my playing, and I have used that same idea to help a lot of people that I've taught over the years. So regardless of if they end up going down the TCE path, I think that just having this in your toolkit is immensely useful.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, because when you think about it, the first thing came to mind for me was inertia. All right. So, the law of inertia, that, an object at rest tends to stay at rest, object in motion tends to stay in motion unless acted on by an outside force. And understanding that, from a physics perspective, that it takes more energy to get something to start than it does to maintain it. And I think when we have inconsistency with the initiation of sound, whether it be in a phrase or, my God, like when the first note that comes out of your horn is squirrely, then it sets up a chain reaction that's psychological. So you start freaking out, and then you start doing things to adjust, and then suddenly you find yourself completely falling apart. If the first note speaks and it's where you want it to be, it's how you want it to be, then it puts you in that positive state of mind. So then everything starts to work easier because you're no longer fighting against yourself.
Yeah, one of the things that really, really actually sold TCE to me, and it's so trivial, but when you're on a job, these things matter. I used to play in this band, and we used to play 9 to 5. I think is that Dolly Parton's song?
Right. Yeah.
And that note, in at least I think in the key that we sang it, played it in, was a high C sharp on a B flat trumpet. So working 9 to 5. I nearly quit the trumpet over that note. Honestly, I used to come out. That would ruin a night for me. I would go out and I'd be playing, play a gig, and everything was going well, and this tune would come up, and I'd be like, "This is it. This is." And night after night, I'd be like, all right, I'm giving up. I'm quitting. I can't take this anymore, because it's just one note, and it was just spiap every time. Just because it's something I hadn't mastered at that point, and it was. I struggled a lot from trying to be perfect all the time, as well, which that can really mess up any player, I think, because you'll never get there.
No, that's absolutely true. That's true in everything in life, perfection. It actually, there's a really interesting concept of perfection, and it's kind of a duality. It's that the concept that we have of perfection is an illusion. Things will never be perfect based on what our idea of perfection is. But at every moment, you're absolutely perfect. And the idea with that is that if you're playing, so if we apply it in the terms of music, you know, those cracked C sharps. In my case, it's like D's and E's. There are a couple songs that I have to play that, you know, it's just like popping out E's, boom, boom, boom. And you know, my performance on that is perfect. It may not be perfect in the fact that I hit it every time, but it's perfect because of everything that I'm doing, everything that I've done up to this point. I can't do it any other way. So that is perfection. That it's just it's that the absolute best that can be done with those things. If I want it to be different, then I have to start changing actions. I have to change what I practice. I have to change how I practice. I have to change, you know, maybe change my embouchure, change my gear, whatever. But it will always be perfect. You know, you can't expect things to be, you know, if you're doing the wrong stuff at the beginning, you can't expect the end result to be anything other than what it is. So that's kind of, to me, that's kind of an interesting concept when people start talking about perfection. So I just wanted to throw that in. So
well, and it's like as well as it's very much you mentioned equipment, but it's also that idea that you have in your mind about, you know, if it were a high C sharp in a symphony and you just had to go, oh, that's so very different from having to go that. You know, and so I had come from the British brass bands and then symphony orchestras, in terms of my education at least. And so yeah, going into this commercial field and needing that different way of doing things is, yeah, it wasn't going to be there.
well, you know, I've recently had Walt Johnson on as a guest, and Walt had developed a method that he, you know, a book that he called Double High C in 10 minutes, which, you know,
I've got it.
yeah, I think almost every commercial player has got that book in their library. But, you know, that's kind of a very unique concept. And it's something, you know, going back to what we were talking about earlier, this is a method that has worked obviously has worked for him because Walt's done a lot of stuff. So it works for him, doesn't work for everybody. But that concept of, you know, I use this approach to playing here, and then when I have to do something else, I use this approach to playing over here. Other people that talk about like using the breath for compression, it's like, okay, when you're in this register, you can just breathe in a more relaxed way. If you want to shift to a higher gear, then you need to shift your breathing patterns or things like that. So I've seen that in a lot of different methodology. Some people like that idea of when I need to do this, then I change this. Some people want to do the same thing from low F sharp to double high C. With TCE, is this something that you use throughout the range of the horn? Is it that you use, you know, all the time when you play, or is this something that is applied in specific situations?
Yeah, so monitor my tangents here. So first of all, I want to almost disrupt the conversation immediately by saying, in my mind, I believe in the separation of, I was going to say church and state. I believe in the separation of technique and music. So when you practice TCE, it is a very specific thing and it is right or wrong. But when you play music, there are many times when the way that we practice TCE exercises are absolutely inappropriate. And so what that means is that if we're saying that maybe by definition that TCE is a compression-based approach, and I'm going to play every note in the same way, if I want a nice tone and a soft attack, I have to be able to do it the other way as well. Now, the way that I justify that is my tongue is always anchored on the bottom lip when I play. And I always think of attacks as being a spitting action, but I'm not using that full-blown compression all the time. And so what the thing is with thinking of it in that way is that everything is in place, so that if I suddenly need the power as such, then it's there. I don't have to make a huge shift from tongue behind the teeth to suddenly, oh, I need to put the tongue forward, or I suddenly need to move this. It's all there in place. But Ideologically speaking, to answer your question directly, I think that if you're going to play across the whole range of the instrument, you want to do it in pretty much the same way. You know, when you, personally, I found that going up into what I would refer to as the altissimo register, I always describe the registers of the trumpet in octaves starting from a low G. So the low register is the lowest octave, then the middle register is G in the staff to the top of the staff, then the high register is the next octave, and then beyond that, I really feel like I've got to start manipulating things here in order to get that sound to come out. I don't tend to lose the ability to play up to G over high C in my normal playing if I have to take a couple weeks off. But anything above that just disappears because, well, the physics of the instrument does change, but also just because it's that delicate balance that I hinted at before, where you have to, you know, if you're if everything's closed down here, the air just doesn't get through. And so there have been loads of sort of different ideas for thinking about how to get past that. And I like to think that it's an unfurling action that happens above G over high C in order to allow the lips, so that the vibration is happening inside the mouth or inside on the inside of the lips as such. But everything else is all, I would tend to think of it as playing in the same way.
Yeah.
I think there's as well, if you give me a couple more minutes, the other thing is that a significant part of TCE, at least in the way that Bob Civiletti taught it to me, is to include the double pedal tones as played in the trumpet yoga system. In that case, you are literally using two embouchures. So in order to play the double pedal register, you are using the Einsätzen embouchure with the bottom lip completely rolled out. And then when you're playing in the normal playing register, you're using an Ansätzen embouchure where you're placing the mouthpiece on the outside of the lips like you normally would. And so there is you could definitely interpret the teachings from the trumpet yoga time as being very, you know, it's all very much focused on that curling in of the bottom lip, which is very similar to the double high C in 10 minutes thing anyway. It's just that he's, you know, he's definitely making a distinct change. All right, how well did we answer that question?
Yeah, it was great. It was great. As far as I'm concerned, it was a great answer. So in your work right now, are you still actively playing a lot of commercial music, or what is your playing?
So I mean, the lockdown in the UK cut off my income stream in a day. I actually so it was I had 3 gigs on that weekend, and I played the last one, and then that was it. I was at home for 9 months, and so since lockdown has eased and we've been let back out into the world, I have chosen not to do certain bands and things, but basically my projects at the moment, I'm involved. I'm sort of first call for one function band, which is weddings and parties, and so that's all. It's a lot of pop and disco stuff, but actually this band has got quite a lot of sort of 90s music in it as well. So Basement Jaxx and you know, sort of some Beyonce songs and that sort of stuff, which is a little bit more up to date than some of the more traditional wedding bands in this country. And then I'm in a fusion band. We always say Latin funk fusion. Basically, our main influence is an Australian band called the Cat Empire.
Okay.
That's a band called Mango Factory, and so it's we only do one song that isn't original, so that's it's all our own compositions. And I'm also in an authentic, or we always use the word authentic Cuban salsa band. because there are, you know, like I'm sure it's the same everywhere in the world. There are salsa bands out there that are just doing head arrangements, whereas actually the guy that did all the arrangements for our band went to Cuba and studied with some percussionists out there and bought a library of CDs, and came back, and you know, and he really tried to stick to the form in terms of the I don't know the terminology, but there's patterns where you alternate between improvised singing and riffs, and it goes around in a cycle, and this sort of thing. So, you know, we stick to that form quite strictly, and so that band is called Fiesta Resistance.
Okay,
It's
nice play on words there.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's again, that band is always in a state of flux. It's existed for about 10 years, and we've recently taken on most members are new at this point, and so it's having a bit of a rebirth, and we're hoping to sort of get out gigging, you know, next year, which will be good.
Yeah, well, I know so many people that are in that same boat. You know, it's just been a crazy time, but and I think so many people had obviously a lot of time on their hands, and as we are transitioning, yeah, things are opening up more. Yeah, this is a good time, you know, if people are looking to do some little fine tuning on their playing, maybe considering playing with a few new approaches, like something like TCE, that this is a good time to do it. You know, so you have a little laboratory to work with, and you're not going to be as worried about, like you were talking about with your upcoming Messiah gig when you were.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
You know, like it's good to have a little cushion, you know.
Yeah.
So if you know, you're working with someone and you know, they're considering, so if I came and say, hey Rich, I really want to learn a lot more about TCE and I want to start trying to apply it, you know, what would you suggest in terms of how to, yeah, is this dive in the deep end, or is this ease into the process of creating this kind of new approach to sound production?
Yeah, so I mean, the thing is, it really depends where you're at as a player. So, and I suppose as well, another thing is, if you actually believe that what we're doing here is embouchure change, because we have to, like I think I said earlier on that I made some comment about, you know, we have to decide what an embouchure is before we decide to change it. So to me, the definition of the embouchure is it's not so much about where we put the mouthpiece. Obviously, that is very dependent on your dental structure and such things, but also I would argue that maybe to a degree the TCE negates a lot of that. But anyway, we put the mouthpiece where it's comfortable and where the lip vibrates the best. What for me an embouchure is you know, the way that we choose to use the muscles, the musculature of the face, and in the case of the TCE, the tongue as well. So I've had people come to me before where they've read some stuff online about the TCE and they go, oh, you know, I'm not getting it, and what they'll pick up their trumpet and they'll just tongue things really hard. And I say, I don't see how this is making any difference. Like, okay, so actually what we might need is some stepping stones. If you look at Jerome Callet's development over 40 years, he started off with the trumpet yoga, with the Einsätzen, Ansätzen, double pedal note exercises. And what they're doing is they're teaching you movements that you're probably not going to figure out in another way. So there was a lot of talk in some older embouchure manuals about jaw position. In fact, something that really turned Claude Gordon off of teaching people about embouchure was that he had a teacher that taught him to push his jaw forward, and it ruined his ability to play, both physically and psychologically. He talks about it in his Brass Playing's No Hard and Deep Breathing book, you know, and the thing is that actually Jerry Callet was quite into jaw position during the 70s, at least. his Brass Power and Endurance book talks about literally moving the jaw in and out in order to manipulate pitch, which to me is quite a scary concept. But the interesting thing is, and the reason I'm talking about it, is that when you unfurl the lips and learn this, I'm going to use the term lip grip. When you learn this proper lip grip, you find that your jaw actually does come forward and align your teeth, or at least it does with me now after a long period of doing these exercises. And I never consciously tried to push my jaw forward, but doing the exercises has resulted in it happening. So here's the thing: when you learn to move the lips in a different way, then it also means that other things are going to change. So I spoke quite a bit over the years with a trumpet player called Lee Adams, who was a Super Chops advocate for many years. He's actually the owner of Callet.com. He bought the rights to sell Jerry Callet's trumpet designs when he retired in turn of the century 20 years ago. And so what Lee used to talk about is how he would teach people this idea of he says central lip compression, but again, I often think of things in terms of what you're teaching people what not to do rather than telling them what they should do. And so rather than teaching people tight corners, flat chin, or stretching of the top lip, or holding it tight inside the mouthpiece, these habits that a lot of people pick up, or some of them are very traditional ideas for correct playing. So don't let me diss them too much. But if you work on this idea of everything drawing towards the center, then what you'll find is that you stop creating resistance in different parts of your body. So maybe it will allow you to relax your chest and do what we might refer to as open the throat. It might also allow you to bring the tongue forward in the mouth more because the throat is relaxed. So these things all, it's a very step-by-step process, I think is what I'm saying. What I would often get people to do first is learn to articulate by flicking the inside of the top lip with the tip of the tongue, spitting seeds, as I mentioned before. And then let's try and figure out how to play some double pedal tones, because even if you just do that for a month, then you'll be able to move things into positions that you probably couldn't before. And that will then put you in a better position for learning the TCE. Now, the reason that I've got to a point of teaching it in this way is literally because of my own experience. So I learned to do this stuff from the instructions that came with the Master Super Chops DVD, which was the last thing that Jerome put out in it was 2007.
Mm-hmm.
Now he in this instruction he talks about, I think it just goes in steps. He says, open the jaw wide, curl the tongue between the teeth, or he uses the term tongue wedge, but like a fist, and then grip the tongue with the lips, and then spit. And he uses the term spit buzz. That was one of his big things that a lot of people who are still into this stuff tend not to use, because of that whole chicken and egg thing of, do we create the buzz or does the buzz create us? But so you start off with this spit buzz technique which is essentially it's an isometric exercise. Every time you spit, the lips flex, and so it's you get this, you learn this idea of gripping, and then you just pick up your trumpet and interface it with this thing this embouchure you've created without the instrument, and you find that you can't play anymore. It took me, I was hammering away at this for a couple months, and it was really not, I was never getting to a stage where I could play a melody. I was even struggling, Jerry always wanted you to start at the bottom and work your way up. So scale of C major, and then D major, then E major. And, I'd get 5 or 6 notes into it and it all gets a bit tonguey. Like a lot of people talk about, if you practice articulations, that's the one thing you're not going to get any better at, because it all just gets a bit, and it's all so stiff and awkward. And yeah, so I don't want people to experience that and go, oh, this TC thing's nonsense. So my approach is just to go, okay, well, we'll take you one step closer to what I do by learning to tongue on the lips, and do the pedal tone exercises. The tongue on the lips thing is really fascinating for me, and although it's obviously the part of this teaching, it actually sort of ties in with a lot of other ideas. So obviously, anyone would say to you, don't go poking the lips with the tongue, because you're disrupting the embouchure. But if you do it for a while, if you just practice some scales, striking the top lip with the tip of the tongue, then what you'll find is that your lips get used to it, and you increase the structural integrity of your embouchure. That is, the lips learn to stay still whilst being abused from the inside. And so this kind of lip grip is something that over time, the sealing of the lips will help you to reduce things like mouthpiece pressure, because not everyone has mouthpiece pressure issues for the same reasons, but a lot of the time it's simply because the harder we blow, the more the lips separate, and then we want the aperture to shrink as we ascend in pitch, but because they're separating from us blowing so hard, then we have to, we use the pressure to put them back where they should be. And so this exercise, tonguing on the lips, can help to solve that. Now, there are other effects that happen. In order to be able to touch the lips with the tongue, the jaw has to be open. Now, people might say that you want the jaw, you don't want to open the jaw too much. I know that was something that I think Donald Reinhardt was quite against, was opening the jaw too much. But this is the thing: if you unhinge your jaw, then you also relax the top of your throat, and so then that enables you to actually, again, there's a lot of talk about closed throat in playing. And I mentioned before that I believe that it's a resistance thing. If you don't create appropriate resistance at the chops, then your body creates it somewhere else.
Right.
And so, yeah, if your jaw is open so that the tongue can get through, then your throat is more relaxed. And then the other thing is, coming back to closed throat, we often close the throat with the back of the tongue. But if your tongue is so far forward that you're touching the lips, then for a lot of people, that means that the back of the tongue isn't down the throat anymore. And so it's all this one simple idea can really just unlock all of these other pieces, all other pieces of the puzzle, that if I was to say to you, oh, open your jaw, or thrust your jaw forward, or relax your throat, or don't raise the back of your tongue when you play. Well, we don't have much conscious control over these things. And so, yeah, you can tell this idea really, I find it really interesting.
Yeah. And yeah, like you're talking about Reinhold, I have, I've studied, with Jerry, as I said before, I've studied with Reinhardt people, with Stevens methods people. Yeah. So a lot of different, and all of them have some similarities, but it's some of the subtleties of the way things are described. And going back to what I was saying before about the blind man and the elephant, I think sometimes it's the words that we use to describe things are based on what we feel going on. And like for me, my physiological structure is I have an underbite, so my lower teeth protrude past my upper teeth.
Right. Okay.
So for me,
I love that.
Right. So for me, the idea of pushing my jaw forward that's just my natural state of playing.
Yeah.
I actually have to pull my lower jaw a little bit back so that I have a flatter surface to support the mouthpiece on. Because in my natural state, my lower teeth are kind of like that, and my upper teeth like this. So the mouthpiece would kind of, so it doesn't, I have to do something slightly different. So if I were to be teaching someone and I say, oh, well, when you play, you have to pull your jaw back. Well, if your jaw is already receded, then that's counterproductive. So instead of saying what you feel, because that's what we usually dictate on. If we can start thinking about why we need to do that. So is it that I actually need to push my jaw forward or back, or am I trying to create more of a vertical alignment between my upper and lower teeth? Am I trying to create more support, or to create a shift in the pressure of the mouthpiece against my face to the upper lip or the bottom lip? So all these kind of different things. And I think sometimes we get so caught up in well, this is what I think it is. This is what I think I'm doing, as opposed to this is the effect I'm trying to get. This is what I'm ultimately trying to do. And then when you do that, then it gives the individual the ability to figure out, well, how do I get that result? What do I need to do to get that to happen?
Yeah, I really liked the idea of universal principles, is the way that Roy Stevens talked about it in his book.
Right.
I think one of the things he says is that if the teeth are aligned and the lips meet evenly between them, then provided that nothing moves, literally the harder you blow, the higher the note comes out. And so he would spend a lot of time working on that alignment. Yeah, that's really interesting. Do you remember, out of chance, what how you were typed by a Reinhardt teacher?
The type that I was given was a 4.
Yeah.
But technically, it's by Doc's original stuff, it's a 2.
Oh, right. Okay.
Because and he used to have that, which is my structure, which is the lower teeth protrude past the upper teeth. But he said, as of blah blah blah, because of improvements in dentistry and things like that, very few people have this problem, because it's usually corrected surgically or things like that. So my parents didn't have dental insurance, so I couldn't afford to get it fixed. So technically, so what he's basically did is taking the 2 and the 4, because the plane characteristics are similar in terms of where I naturally want to place the mouthpiece. I want to place it lower on the top lip. There's a slight upward angle to my blow because of that. So that falls into that 4 category.
All right. Yeah, that's really interesting. So I was told when I was 14 that I could either have braces and quit the cornet for 2 years, or I could have wonky teeth for life. So I got the wonky teeth. Yeah. It's no, but it's interesting because there's some tapes that there are some recordings that Reinhardt made where he discusses all these various types, and one of the tips he gives is that you should visit the dentist every I can't remember how frequently, let's just say 6 months, and have them make a mold of your teeth, so that if you're in an accident, they can put them back where they were.
Yeah.
As a vital thing for brass players.
Yeah, I know a lot of guys that have gone down that rabbit hole and have done things with trying to get their even though they haven't had any accidents or any problems, they would go to the dentist and they're a little bit off from their mold, and they would start getting their teeth filed, or getting their mouth reshaped and all kinds of stuff. And sometimes it does not work well. It doesn't turn out well for them, because like you were saying about Jerry and his change his change in his approach to playing, and going from the power to becoming, and I think you see this in a lot of the people. I've talked to Roger Ingram about this, Wayne Bergeron about this, that when you're 20, 21 years old, your early 20s, you can get by with being a more, for lack of a better word, physical player.
Yeah.
As you get older, things, your body changes, your teeth change, the collagen levels in your skin change, your muscle tone changes. All of these different things start to happen. And it's because you're a holistic system, your body is a holistic system, as you're alluding to earlier. One thing changes, everything has to change in response to that change. So and a lot of times we make the adjustments naturally. So especially when you're one of those people who are driven by sound, you start to make subtle and minute adjustments in your playing to match the sound concept, as opposed to if you're playing by feel, where it's like, oh, this feels like, oh, I don't feel like this is in the right spot. So then sometimes feel can get you messed up, because you always want to revert back to what feels natural to you, which is basically what feels comfortable, which is the way you always did it. But if the system is changing, then you can't always rely on that as being as an accurate indicator. So it's really kind of, it's fun, it's really fascinating to me when you start to get into all of the physiological aspects of playing, the psychological aspects of playing, the physics of sound production. Man, there's all kinds of different discussions that you can have on this stuff, and but you don't want to get stuck with the old analysis, paralysis by analysis. You start thinking about it too much, and then you can't do anything. That at the end of the day, it's about making music and having fun.
Well, that's it. Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah. So that is, I mean, I think pedagogy, I like talking about pedagogy primarily because I like getting an insight into the thought processes that people have about what they're doing. And when you document things, and especially like with Jerry and his three main kind of the canon of Callet, if you will, the trumpet yoga, the super chops, and the TCE. That watching that progression, watching the insights, watching the ability to say, hey, this is the way I used to do it, but I think I found a better way. And Jerry was really good about that. It's like, this is what I used to say, but and it wasn't like it's complete garbage. It's like, this is what worked for me then, but I think I found a better way. And as opposed to, once you put it on paper, then you can never change it, and it can never be questioned. It can never be improved on. And I think that's a fault that we have societally as well.
It's true. I think one of the things that in that regard that's sort of interesting is that Jerry, you did used to sort of discard his old teachings in a way. He'd sort of say, "Oh, that's old news to me." But the thing is that when you talk to somebody who has sort of a regular pedal tone routine, in terms of the Maggio, Rafael Mendes style pedal tones, and then you introduce them to Einsätze and Ansätze and the trumpet yoga stuff, it's a whole nother world. And obviously I don't think you can really do them both at the same time. And it's great that we've got that record of those exercises having, or that method having been written down, even if it's not necessarily necessary for the latest and greatest Callet ideas. It's still there for people to discover and learn from. I mean, I learned a lot about breathing from doing the Einsätze and Ansätze and pedal tones. Just being able to hold those notes out. It's not the same as playing in the normal register. Not to begin with, anyway.
Well, it's our never-ending quest for improvement, and I believe there's a kernel of truth in everything, and there's something to be learned in every circumstance. So you either learn a better way to do things, or you learn not to do it that way. So, but you have to have the open mind and the willingness to try things. And it's like the one of the most annoying things that kids do is you try to get them to eat something new, and they're like, I don't like it. And it's like, why have you had it before? No, I don't like it. So how do you know whether something works if you've never tried it yourself? So, all right. So, well, we have a few segments, regular segments that we need to get through
Oh, sure.
before we can end
I love
our
this
time
bit.
together. And our first segment is brought to us by our mutual friend, Mr. Michael Barkley of Barkley Microphones. This is called Sound Off. And Sound Off, we're going to talk about your concepts of sound, and in particular, ways that you can suggest to people to approach developing the right sound for the job.
Okay. Let's see where this one goes. So the thing is, that's really interesting. I've spent some time talking with acousticians about sound. I mean, I say that I've also spent a lot of time talking with Mike Barkley about sound, because I've got one of his microphones and he's always on about the placement, for the very reason that I'm about to mention, and that sound has shape. So when we think about the trumpet sound as being a composite of the fundamental pitch and all of its overtones, it's the overtones that travel, because the lower pitched sounds tend to be round and they surround us, and that's why it sounds wonderful when we're in a 2 meter by 2 meter practice room with the biggest mouthpiece money can buy. It sounds fantastic, but actually, if you were making that sound in a concert hall, your audience 100 feet away aren't really going to hear it. You'll be buried in the cello section, and so to me, I really tend to avoid words like bright and dark, though really we are just using metaphors all the time. I want to talk about resonance and projection. And so projection can come from having great articulation, but that doesn't help you on a long note. But yeah, essentially I want sparkling sound. I have justified using smaller mouthpieces than are accepted in polite society by saying that when I'm playing first trumpet in an orchestra, I will be there with a B flat trumpet and a mouthpiece that most people think is very small, but the sound I'm trying to make is like that of an E flat trumpet, or because that's what will be heard out the front anyway, even if I were to use something more accepted, in that sort of situation. So it's just, for me, it's all about that, it's about resonance and projection, and not bright tone, a sparkly tone.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I love that idea of thinking about resonance and projection as opposed to the bright or dark. So that's I like that. That's a great little shift. So,
Thanks.
cool. All right, so our next segment is brought to us by our friends at Venture Mouthpieces. It's called Geared Up, and Venture is the company where technology, design, and craftsmanship intersect. Use the code Trumpet Gurus 21, get 10% off your order. And Geared Up, we want to talk about gear and particularly your concepts of gear. You were talking about using a smaller mouthpiece than usually socially acceptable in certain circles, not my circles, obviously. But what is your concept on the role of gear in the playing, and when you're working with a student and they're talking about maybe changing the gear, needing to upgrade their gear or find more appropriate gear for the work that they're doing, what are some of the tips that you would share with people?
Yeah. Okay. So I mean, this is a really interesting topic. I actually think that for the most part, we have all been, I don't want to use the word conned, we've all been conned into using sort of inappropriately large gear over time. And I think that there's a really interesting thread that you can pull on in terms of why we are after certain sounds. And I would, maybe one day we'll talk about whatever happened to the F trumpet, because that's a whole story in itself. But generally speaking, I think that I favor small mouthpieces. Shallow mouthpieces is probably a better way of talking about it, because they enforce discipline. So one of the big lessons that I had to learn when changing my playing was not to blow the lips into the mouthpiece. And when you play on shallow equipment, you have to learn to use less of what makes that happen. Maybe it means less air. Maybe it means just actually having a little bit more discipline with the chops. But the interesting thing is that if you consider lip intrusion to be an important part of what's going on with your choice of mouthpiece, then a lot of people who play on bigger, deeper mouthpieces, even normal things like a 3C or a 1.5C, something like this, they've got so much lip intrusion that they're effectively playing on something as shallow as me anyway. They just don't really realize it. And I think that we also have to come back to that idea again of oh gosh, my train of thought, that's gone. Yeah, the ship sailed. Oh yeah, so how much of the sound we're creating is actually being heard out the front. So to be more specific, I actually have a mouthpiece that's made by I've got two mouthpieces that are made by Doug McVeigh at Venture Mouthpieces that I sell on one of my websites. And it's that sort of shallow V cup for one of them. They've got a quite a cushioned rim. I've got a bit of a fetish for Rudy Muck, believe it or not, in terms of that cushion rim design. And these are not based upon a rim that wide. They're actually based upon a Colicchio mouthpiece that Jerome Callet found some years back. And yeah, so the cushion rim, flatter rim, I find that that's something that really helps me not to stretch my lips or not to tighten up too much. I always find that on something like if you took a 7C that's got that very pronounced bite and sloping towards the outside, that makes you want to pull things apart somewhat.
Yeah. Well, it's so interesting because I recently switched over to venture myself, and I ended up going with something much smaller than I would if I was picking out based on dimensions. It was definitely smaller in terms of diameter and cup volume than what I've been playing, but it did help with my lip intrusion because of the change in the alpha angle. So it helped to hold me in place. And what I told Doug was, there's a lot of things that work really, really well with it immediately. But like you're saying, I had to stay disciplined. So I had to I kind of made a choice between, do I want something that gives me more wiggle room when I'm playing, so I don't have to be as on top of stuff, or do I want something that's going to basically force me to stay focused? And that's kind of like, with like trumpets, a lot of people who've played the Yamaha Z, the Bobby Shoehorn, and I tried playing it. The first few times I tried playing it, I could not play it to save my life. It would shut off on me. And then I started to talk to people, and they're like, well, you're basically just blowing too much. You just need to back off. And if you back off, the horn will actually respond better. Not, it's contradictory to what you're thinking, and the higher you go, just back off a little bit more. And once I got that concept, the horn opened up for me. That's not the horn that I play, but it taught me that lesson that, sometimes using smaller gear that requires you to stay focused realigns those correct principles of playing. But I still do keep a bigger mouthpiece just for when I get swollen and things like that.
I think one of the things is that I often say that the larger mouthpiece works just fine. I don't have any more range to go down that path. No more range on a small mouthpiece than I do on a big one. But it allows you to play incorrectly, or it allows you to, again, it's that ideology, but it allows you to do all the things that I'm trying to avoid. So in terms of diameter, I'm generally these days around sort of, to use Bach terms, it's like a 10.5C sort of size in terms of internal diameter. I did go all the way down to 0.600 at one point, but I've always had trouble with my low notes anyway, so I don't need that in my life, you know. So I've come back somewhat, but again, to go down the pedagogical route, I find that when I play on a smaller internal diameter, my top lip is not so stretched, and so in terms of three-dimensional lip tissue that is vibrating, it's actually greater than when I was using big gear and stretching so much, you know.
Yeah. Well, that's again, that's a super interesting concept, and that warrants an entire series, not just an episode. That is a lifelong study. All right. Well, we've got one final thing that we need to do, and this segment is brought to us by Robinson's Remedies. This is our Robinson's Remedies rapid fire round. It's a series of questions that go all over the place, and as we bounce around from topic to topic, just need your quickest response. So, Rich, are you ready?
I think so, yeah.
All right, here we go. First question for you. Who's the biggest influence on your life that is not a trumpet player?
I think I'd have to say probably my mother, because she's been there so many times in my life. First of all, driving me off to band practices when I'm sure she had better thing to do, you know, all the time when I was a kid. But also, you know, every time when I've finished university, she was like, "What are you doing next? How are you going to make it as a musician?" You know, it's just that constant sort of like having to answer to somebody. They're all along.
Yeah. You got to give your mother some respect. So,
yeah.
What's your favorite book?
Okay, I think food books. So I would have to say maybe India by Rick Stein, or Jerusalem by Ottolenghi. There's some just mind-blowing food in those books, of all varieties, whether you like hot and spicy or meaty or even vegetarian, and just using vegetables in ways you've never imagined. Yeah, they're fantastic. Just I love good food. So
well, so do I. What's the worst movie you've ever seen?
Oh, okay. So have you heard of a film called The Room? The Room was written, produced, directed, and stars this one guy. I don't know his name. It's probably for the best. It's a strange story about some kind of love triangle, and I'm pretty sure that none of it makes any sense. But yeah, it's absolutely abysmal and completely meme worthy. You know, just you could make endless jokes from that film.
Okay, well, maybe I need to watch it just for that. If you weren't a trumpet player, what would you want to be?
Probably this is quite geeky, a Linux systems administrator or some kind of programmer. I think that's sort of my other thing.
The other thing? That's all good. That's all good. What's your favorite drink?
Favorite drinks, in the day tea, in the evening beer. Simple.
Very, very European.
Yeah.
Unless you're Michael Barkley, and then it's beer in the morning and whiskey at night.
Well, because he's from the other part of Britain.
Yeah.
the bit we stole.
Yeah, we love you, Michael. We really do. You could have a dinner party.
Yeah.
And maybe you're going to cook it with using some of those great books you have. You're going to have this dinner party, and you can invite any three living people, any three people in the world. Who would you want to have at that party?
I've got to try not to just say trumpet players, because I think maybe that's a little bit. I do have to say Wynton Marsalis, because he inspired me a lot when I was young, but he's also inspired me a lot later in life. Dr. Jordan Peterson, I find him a fascinating character, a clinical psychologist who's got a podcast I listen to. And I think Eric Miyashiro, if I'm going to go trumpet again, because he's really interesting, completely self-taught. I just love to pick his brains about chops.
Eric's a fun dude. And you have three other chairs at your table, and you can invite any three people from history, any three people that are no longer with us.
Okay. Dizzy Gillespie. I think, yeah, I'd love to talk to him about harmony, actually, and just even not just what it is, but just, the way that he unraveled it and created something new. I'm all about that. So, the composer Eric Satie, who I did a little course on when I was at college, but he's a wacky character, and I just find him, again, he's very against the grain. So there's a bit of a theme here, I think. But yeah, and maybe someone like Nelson Mandela, I think, would, that's a life that you could, yeah, I'd really love to talk to him. He'd probably put some of my woes into perspective.
Yeah. Well, that is very true.
Yeah.
Okay, next question. Lacquer, plated, or raw?
All my horns are plated, so yeah, plated, I think. I love the look of raw, but I'd get green hands, and I can't be doing that. So.
Well, it match your jumper there, so.
Yeah, it's true.
What's your favorite quote?
I've got this one. A thing is a thing, not what is said of that thing. I first discovered that in a film. It's a minor detail from one scene of a film called Birdman, but I think it's actually a Susan Sontag quote. She was a sort of a writer and philosopher.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. What's your greatest fear?
I think having a meaningless life, sort of just not really achieving anything.
Mm-hmm. In other words, a trombone player. No, because there were really only three great brass instruments: the trombone, the horn, and the trumpet. So maybe a tenor horn player. I'll let you have that one. You could be granted one superpower. What would you want it to be?
I think the ability to allow other people to see your perspective, or putting thoughts in people's minds.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. What aspect of trumpet playing do you feel is the most overrated?
Trying to impress people. And maybe I don't want to say high notes, because I actually love them and I think they're really important. And I heard somebody on this podcast recently saying, sort of fast improvisation, and this is sort of like combining the two. I think it's that, we should all just try to be musical, play like Chet.
Yeah. Well, what aspect do you think is the most underrated?
From an educational point of view, I think that playing by ear is left far too late for a lot of people. So, I did a lot of playing by ear when I was young, and it's all the things that involves. So, I play you a tune, you play it back, but if I want you to play that tune starting on a different note, then you should be able to do it, and that really changes your understanding of what music is. It brings us back to that song concept, that really it's, if you can sing it, you should be able to play it.
You could go back in time and give your younger self one piece of advice about music. What would it be?
Oof, it would have to be to start improvising sooner. Buy the Jamie Aebersold books, as it would have been back in those days. We didn't have the apps then, because I'd waited too late. I do improvise a lot. I do it a lot in my music, but I would have better language if I had started earlier.
Yeah. And what piece of advice would you give your younger self about life?
It would be financial. I think knowing the difference between saving up money so you can buy something and, investing and saving for the future. I didn't really know about that when I was younger, and it's quite important apparently.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I'm still trying to figure that one out too. Final question for you, Rich. What do you want your legacy to be?
I think just some kind of respect for having worked at something and done well. So I mean, it's something I really like is that the people will see you play music and they don't know how the pain that you went through to get there. They just take away the happiness, and I think that's the most important thing, really.
Well, Rich, I want to thank you for your time with me today, and this has been great. It's been informative. It's been thought-provoking. It's been a little silly at times. Yeah, it's been a trumpet life. So, and if you're interested in finding out more about Rich and his work, and particularly his instruction with TCE, check the show notes. And there are all the resources that you need there. And, certainly I'm going to speak for Rich. If you have questions, you can feel free to reach out to him as he is the expert. I'm just the host. So thanks, Rich, again for being with me. And thank you for joining us for this episode of The Hang. Make sure that you like and subscribe, share, do all those wonderful things, and support The Hang, because this is something I love doing, and I do this not just for me, but I do it for you too. So support in any way that you can. Support our sponsors, and definitely, again, if you're interested in learning more about TCE, hit Rich up, and he'll get you set on the right path. So, as always, folks, peace and slide grease. We out.
Thanks for hanging with us today. This podcast is all about creating deeper connections through our mutual love of music and the trumpet life. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast and also like and share this episode with a friend. We want to see The Hang grow for show. Please support our sponsors and consider becoming a personal supporter of this podcast as well. Remember, for less than the price of a bottle of valve oil a month, you can keep this podcast moving smoothly. The Trumpet Guru's Hang is recorded at the Candy Factory, a co-working space and social club located in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Jose Johnson is the executive producer. Post-production editing is by Mitch Bowers. Our opening theme song was composed and performed by Lexi Signor, and our closing theme music comes courtesy of The Greatest Funeral Ever. Incidental music is by Ethan Swayze and Jose Johnson. Graphic design by Ann Kirby of the Sweet Corps. The Trumpet Guru's Hang podcast is produced in collaboration with the So Good Lancaster Media Group.